death at the brink of nuclear war. A crisis that seemed to bring the United States and the Soviet Union very close to nuclear war began 20 years ago this week. We'll be back with the Cuban Missile Crisis in the news. And now, the Cuban Missile Crisis in the news. It was back in the early 1960s. John F. Kennedy was President of the United States, Nikita Khrushchev was Premier of the Soviet Union, and Fidel Castro, with Soviet backing, had recently taken over Cuba. U.S.-Soviet relations were reaching an all-time low, and Cuba became one focus of the tensions. First, there was the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion. Some Cubans who had fled from Castro tried to return in force and stir up a new revolution. They failed. President Kennedy admitted that the invaders had been secretly trained and supported by the U.S. government. Then, in October 1962, high-flying American spy planes took pictures of Cuba, which revealed that the Soviets were building bases there for nuclear missiles which could hit many cities in the U.S. On October 22nd, 20 years ago yesterday, President Kennedy demanded that Khrushchev take out the Soviet missiles, and he sent the U.S. Navy to block any new arms shipments to Cuba. A nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union suddenly seemed possible. Finally, after 4 weeks, Khrushchev had the Soviet missiles withdrawn. One U.S. official said at the time, "We're eyeball to eyeball," and I think the other fellow just blinked. I'm Christopher Glenn with the Cuban Missile Crisis 20 years ago. In the news, comparing the Earth to a greenhouse. Scientists say the Earth's atmosphere works much like a greenhouse. Greenhouse heat is good for flowers, but melting ice could mean trouble. We'll be back with the greenhouse effect in the news. And now, the greenhouse effect in the news. A greenhouse is a place where flowers grow splendidly. The glass lets in lots of sunlight, and then the glass holds in the sun's heat. Scientists say Earth's atmosphere works much the same way, that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere lets sunlight through to the surface of the Earth. Then, like the glass of a greenhouse, the carbon dioxide keeps much of the sun's heat from escaping. Carbon dioxide is a harmless gas, but some scientists say too much carbon dioxide, which comes from burning coal, oil, and gas, is making the Earth too hot. They say the huge polar ice packs have been melting at a more rapid rate for years, and that this melting ice is raising sea levels around the world. They say parts of Florida, for example, could be underwater sometime in the next century, along with other low-lying areas of the world. Scientists are using a computer model to try to predict how much more carbon dioxide would melt how much more ice and what the effect actually is on our oceans. They say they depend on weather stations like one in Hawaii to measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they are urging the Reagan administration not to cut back funds for this program because someday it may tell us enough about the greenhouse effect on Earth to help us control it. I'm Christopher Glenn with the greenhouse effect in the news. They begin to come down. When oil prices shot sky high, there was economic panic in many countries. Now some people are afraid oil prices may come down. We'll be back with oil prices in the news. And now, oil prices in the news. For 10 years, oil prices have been pushed higher and higher and higher by a group of oil-producing nations known as OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Petroleum is another word for oil, and exporting means that these nations sell their oil to other countries. At its recent meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, OPEC wanted to keep oil prices up by pumping less oil, but OPEC's members could not agree on details.
It's a complete failure.
Now, oil experts expect oil prices to go down. There is simply more oil available than is needed. In the late 1970s, rising oil prices encouraged people to save energy in general and use less oil in particular. OPEC's high prices also speeded up the development of oil sources outside of OPEC, in Alaska, the North Sea, and Mexico. Now, non-OPEC oil fields outproduce OPEC oil fields. The first benefits from lower oil prices should come in the form of reduced prices for gasoline and heating fuel. Cheaper oil is bad news, though, for countries that depend on oil exports. And it's bad news for bankers who have loaned billions of dollars to countries that had expected to pay the money back out of new riches from high-priced oil. I'm Christopher Glenn with Oil Prices in the News.